Rachel. Happy Tuesday. I'm here today to talk to you about how to not take your yuck out on other people. This is a very popular topic right now, I know, because a lot of us are in a lot of yuck. We don't have the means to necessarily deal with our yuck, and taking it out on other people is actually a very common way to deal with yuck when we don't have other options. So what I'm going to do today is actually talk to you a little bit about how you can deal with your yuck in the moment so that you don't take it out on other people, you don't do things you regret. But I'm also going to tell you, if I'm being very honest with you, that this is not the best way to deal with your yuck. It's not in the moment strategies. Now I'm going to tell you the in the moment strategy, but I'm also going to tell you why it's hard to use this strategy. And then I'm going to suggest something that you might want to consider either instead or in addition to trying to figure out what to do in the moment. But because so many people have asked me what to do in the moment, and I've actually never done a podcast episode on it, that's what I'm doing, but I'm going to tell you why this is hard. So let's start by reviewing what yuck is and why we do automatically take it, or very commonly anyway, take it out on other people. So remember, this is a review for most of you, that there is a part of the brain that allows us to act the way we want to act. So it allows us to be frustrated but not take it out on other people. The part of the brain that allows us to do this is the prefrontal cortex. This is the mature, responsible part of the brain that allows us to regulate our emotions and handle things in a way that later we feel good about. But what happens is when we are in some sort of yuck, and all of us are in some sort of yuck right now, some sort of yuck or another. So yuck could be that we're tired, that we're depleted, that we're worried about how things are going to go in the fall, that we feel out of control, that our kids are on us all the time and trying to get our attention. Anything that our brain considers uncomfortable, I call that yuck. What happens is when we are in yuck, our brain senses that yuck as a threat. So it turns on an alarm, and that alarm is our fight or flight response. And this is the reason it's so hard to deal with behavior in the moment and not do things you regret, because our fight or flight response, first of all, shuts down any other part of the brain that it feels is unnecessary for survival. So it shuts down the prefrontal cortex. So when you're flooded with yuck, it's very hard to remember that you don't want to do things you regret. In fact, when you're in yuck, your brain is looking for all of the reasons that you do need to yell at your kids or tell your spouse why what they're doing is stupid, or make your kids feel bad or say mean things to your friend. When you're in yuck, that's what your brain is actually telling you to do. Because one of the things that our fight or flight response does is it fights. It tries to make people feel bad. It tries to attack others. It's a very common way of dealing with yuck. And the other reason you need to know why this is so hard is that our fight or flight response is very, very powerful. If you think about it, we wouldn't be here right now if our fight or flight response weren't powerful, because our ancestors, if they didn't have a powerful fight or flight response, wouldn't have lived long enough to reproduce, and we wouldn't be here and alive right now. So our fight or flight response is very strong, and it assumes things are threats that aren't really threats. As developed as our brains are, our fight or flight response is actually not developed very much over the history of human beings. So we see threats in everything, and we go into yuck and we take our yuck out on others. I call this turning yuck out on other people. There are other things we do that we regret, by the way. You've probably done this a lot lately too. When we are in yuck, we may, in addition to turning it out on other people, we may actually start to numb our yuck. That's where we're drinking a lot of alcohol. Alcohol drinking is a huge and very popular right now yuck number. We may be eating a lot more sugar, so we're gaining weight. We may be zoning out on, social media or watching the news. All of those are also symptoms of yuck. And those are also things we may regret. So this is why it's so incredibly hard in the moment to not do things you regret. Your fight or flight response is very, very powerful, and it shuts off the brain that reminds you that you want to act consistently with your values. However, I'm going to tell you what you want to do in the moment to not take your yuck out on others. It is a deceptively simple strategy, actually, to not take your yuck out on others. There are three main steps. First step is to notice that you are about to go into yuck, or that you're already in yuck. I'm going to actually tell you all three steps, and then I'll go through each one. The next is to actually do something in that moment when you notice your signals. Do something that you won't regret. And the third step is to notice when you are out of yuck. So it sounds so simple. What this basically means is the first step is to notice your signals. Your body will send you signals that you're about to lose your cool. You may not be aware of those signals. And when I first learned this, I was like, look, I don't have any signals. I go from 0 to 60, my body's not telling me anything. Eventually I realized my signal is that my face gets hot. The reason I can guarantee you have a signal is that when you are about to go into fight or flight, into yuck, so you're gonna do something you regret, your body is actually making physiological things are happening. So there are a lot of changes occurring in your body. Your heart is beating faster. You may tense up. All of these are signals that if you paid attention to them, you would notice. Just like your body tells you when you're hungry or you're tired, your body does tell you when you're about to lose it. That's the first thing. You really need to recognize those signals. Those signals are your indication to stop and do some action. So you notice your signal. Now, what action do you do? If you read the literature, what they say when you're in yuck, when you're in fight or flight, when you have this big emotion, what it says is that you should let the feeling pass. That's really what you're supposed to do. Let that feeling pass. It will go away. And while I actually know academically that that's the case, for me, it's really hard to let it pass. So what I suggest parents do, if it's also hard for you, is to find some behavior that allows you to release that energy. For me, when I'm really frustrated, I'm a very sensitive person. I have a ton of energy inside and I need to release it. So there are lots of ways you can release that energy. I talk about a lot of them in the podcast. One of the things that I do is I actually go through the alphabet skipping letters. It takes a little bit of thought. So I go A, B, C, D, E, and I actually just sort of recognize, or I go through this alphabet to give myself something to focus on that's not what's frustrating me. So finding something to do, you may need a more physical release. You may need a more spiritual release. But the point is you recognize your symptom and you release that yuck energy in a way that you don't regret. And then finally, you notice when you are out of yuck. And the way you notice when you're out of yuck is you actually know when you want to help somebody, when you want to support somebody. That's when you're actually out of yuck. If you want to make someone feel bad, that's a symptom of fight or flight. If you want to take away everything your child cares about, or make your spouse or a friend feel or your parent feel so awful, that's a symptom of fight or flight. When you get to the point where you actually want to help someone or support them or get closer to them, that's a sign that you're out of yuck. So very simply, what you want to do is recognize this sign, take action, and then wait until you're out of yuck. Now, it sounds very simple. From my perspective, it's not. So what I want to wrap up with today is something really important. This is probably the most important thing I want you to hear from this video, is that if you have trouble, and when I did the poll yesterday, the most common answer to the poll, I said, do you have a strategy for not taking your yuck out on others? And then one of the options in the poll I gave was, yes, I have a strategy, but I have trouble using it. That was the most common response. And here's what I will say to the people who already have a strategy. Maybe you've decided you'll count backwards, by tens from 100. Maybe that's your strategy. If you have trouble using it, there are two reasons why. First is you're not aware of your signal. Your signal is your body's way of telling you, and if you become aware of your signal, you will be able to do that action. Most people are not aware, or they don't use that signal to get them to do the thing that they won't regret. But this is the more common reason you have trouble with that, is that your yuck is too big. And trying to handle it in the moment is going to take way more energy than you should spend. Trying to control your yuck in the moment is basically putting a Band-Aid on a huge flood. If all you're doing is trying to stop yourself in the moment from doing things that you regret, you're going to be exhausted. What I really recommend you do if you just have trouble dealing with yuck in the moment and you're doing lots of things you regret is think about your yuck overall. Don't try to manage it in the moment because it's not going to be effective. You're just trying to Band-Aid the problem. It's not going to work. So here's another action that I'm going to leave you with today. If your situation is that you really don't think you can handle it in the moment, or you've tried to handle it in the moment and it just isn't working, think about your yuck in general. And I recommend that instead of taking time to think about, what are my symptoms of yuck and what is the action I can take, what I suggest you do with that time is write a list of all the things that are creating yuck right now. All the things that are stressing you out. I call this a yuck dump. Do a yuck dump. And then once you've done a yuck dump, choose one item on your list of yuck, just one, because you want to chisel away at this yuck one item at a time. You take one item and you decide what is in your control about that item and you take action. So let's say you are worried about the fall. Maybe your kids are going to be home for school. Maybe that's something that's stressing you out right now. You realize that when you do a yuck dump. What you want to do is you want to say, what is in my control here? So I know a lot of people are worried about, well, my kids are going to be on the computer for school. I have to get work done. I don't want to have to manage them the whole time. So you think, what's one action that's in my control that I can do to reduce this yuck? One of the things that I'm suggesting to a lot of parents right now is actually when the school year starts, reaching out to the teacher, or maybe you want to wait a week until things calm down, but ask the teacher what their expectations are. Let them know what you're struggling with. Say, hey, my child is not getting on the computer when they're supposed to. It's become a battle. What are your expectations, and do you have any tips? That's something that's in your control that can reduce your yuck. So that's what I really want you to focus on. If you want to do fewer things that you regret, you can think about managing it in the moment. I highly recommend, though, trying to think about what's causing your yuck and addressing it more proactively, chiseling it away at it one situation at a time. And I guarantee that in any case, there's something in your control that you can do to reduce the yuck in your life. I'm here to help with that. So if anybody has some yuck that you don't know how to address, go ahead and post it under this video. I'd be happy to give you strategies. I work with hundreds and hundreds of parents. I've heard all of the yuck right now, and I've been able to help parents find solutions. I'd be happy to do the same for you. So that's my real talk on how to do fewer things that you regret as a result of your yuck. Any questions, feel free to post the video. I will also be back on Friday to talk a little bit more about what to do to not do things you regret. I'll give you a specific example. Also, my podcast episode on Thursday goes into much more detail about how to handle your yuck in the moment. So check that out as well. All right, I look forward to seeing you all again soon.